Hello and welcome to Peaceful at Heart. My name is Cedric Martin and I'll be your host. Each episode we're going to take a closer look at the book Peaceful at Heart, Anabaptist Reflections on Healthy Masculinity. We'll dive into the chapters and hear from the authors. We'll think a little bit more about what healthy masculinity looks like in our modern context. Joining us today is Harry Lafond. Harry, welcome and thanks for your work on the book so we can discuss it today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's Friday afternoon here in Saskatchewan, and we had actual sunshine. That always makes me feel good.
Nice. Yeah, that does sound good. I wanted to say I really appreciated your personal approach to the chapter. I mean, this is my first time meeting you, but I feel like I already know a lot about you. So thank you for that. One thing that really stood out to me in your chapter, Harry, was the story about your dad slipping on ice, and you said until that moment you didn't know if you loved him or not, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what that shift was like for you.
Well, some of that is personality. My personality has always been to question things and to try to very independent person, and my parents raised me that way, to be independent. I was free to roam our acreage, which is about a quarter of the reserve, right from the time I could walk and find my way home. That I think went against my dad's way of viewing me as an individual, as a son, because as I became a teenager, 12, 13 years old, we fought well. We fought like the Dickens, and there was very little that I could do that pleased him, and there was a real anger in me for some of his drinking habits and the way he treated himself, but also the way he treated us at home. My mother and my younger brother, that we were the only ones at home at that time. So that's sort of the background, and when I was about 13, 14 years old, probably more like 13, I was convinced I couldn't love this man. There was nothing between us. And at this particular day, this Saturday evening, we were coming home with my oldest brother in his half-ton truck, and he hit the ditch. There was a blizzard going on. There was blowing snow. There was snowbanks on the road. And so he hit the ditch. And so there was a farm about a quarter of a mile from there, the Willick farm. And so he sent my dad and me to walk over there to see if they would come and pull us out. And my dad, of course, had been drinking all afternoon, and so he was really not in shape to make this walk. As we got close to the farm, he hit a patch of ice, and he just went down. He went down, and I could hear the crunch, of his head hitting the ice. It's looking down at him. And the fear that coursed through my veins at that particular moment, because I saw his face. He was looking at me, and it wasn't the face that I had been seeing. It was a face like, help me. And that changed everything. There was something happened to my emotional, spiritual self at that particular point, and And I realized that I only have one dad, and he's lying there on the ice. And if I can't help him, he's gone. He's gone. He'll freeze to death. This is Saskatchewan, and so I managed to help him to get up, and I supported him. The last part of the way to the Willick farm, and I've not looked back from that time. I remember the anger. I remember the disappointments that I had experienced, but I realized, if I couldn't learn to love this man, then I was really putting myself out, as almost like an orphan. And so I worked from that experience, and I ended up taking care of him in his last few years. My wife and I moved here, and we took care of my mom and dad, and he was we watched over him, and he and I became a father and son. We talked to each other, and we laughed together, and it was a good relationship. When he passed away, I felt as if we had been successful as a father and son, and it's those kinds of experiences that have shaped my thinking, my thinking about fatherhood. The importance of father-son connections to break the cycle, break that cycle that we lived in, as a consequence of history and the damage done to our families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm hearing from you is that there was a vulnerability, a physical vulnerability that sort of broke that barrier down, that you're able to connect with your father a bit more. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the interview that I was able to watch, or the Common Word book launch of Peaceful at Heart that was filmed at the end of 2019. And at that event, you shared that you've deliberately chosen to spend most of your married life on the reserve community. And so I'm wondering how much of your oral history and family history that you share in your chapter came from that part of your life, or how much did you feel like you already knew when you decided to stick around with your reserve community?
I think when Germaine and I first married, and we were both teaching in Onion Lake. Onion Lake is a very traditional Cree community, a large community, and I had just come from experiencing a kind of working with the Renaissance man, who's a man who came from Europe. He was his father was Cree Shoshone, and his mother was Italian. Had come to North America to find his indigenous family, and immersed himself. And so I had worked with this man for 2 years, and when I went to Onion Lake, it just kind of added on to that, and I realized, that that living on reserve is a good option. It gives more than you would receive in a big urban center. Number one, people care. People are not afraid to establish relationships. And if I lived in Ottawa, I lived there for 3 years. I never made a friend in the neighborhood. People are just don't want to do that. I go to Onion Lake, and everybody is my neighbor, and everybody's talking to me, and everybody is friendly and, willing to help. So when we started our family, Germaine and I, my mom and dad needed help. We moved from Onion Lake to Muskeg, my home community. and we set up a trailer, and that's how we started. And once we started living there, we realized this is where we want to raise our family. We want our children to experience relationships, experience friends, experience the opportunity to meet people who are immersed in Cree culture, Cree language, and go to a school where their Creeness is being celebrated and not being ignored by the curriculum. And I have never regretted that decision. I see them now as grown-ups, and they've embraced the learnings that we've given them. Two of them have learned how to are learning how to write syllabics, and they're exploring their Cree language. One actually wrote her master's thesis half in Cree and half in English. So that's a gift that comes from living in a reserve community.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of one of the themes throughout the entire book of Peaceful at Heart is finding that community. And I hear what you're saying about you didn't find that in Ottawa, and I currently live in Toronto, and I definitely understand the urbanites that just keep on with their day and their head down, and they're not always looking for a community. So it's really beautiful that you've been able to find that and experience that with Muskeg.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that in the last few years of living on this reserve, I've always been involved in the community. In many different areas. What I'm working on right now with the community is this whole concept of Wahkohtowin, that's building relationships, building connectedness. And what we're discovering is that it is the foundation of who we are as a people. If we want to write a constitution, that word itself would be the primary foundational word to that constitution. It brings to us what we believe about ourselves, about other people, about our relationship to the land, to the environment, and most importantly, to our God, Mamoyotawimau.
Wow, it's beautiful. Thank you. I one thing that I was thinking about a lot after reading your chapter, and what you specifically mention, is that jails are quickly replacing the residential school experience. And that's been weighing on me heavily. And so I looked up some articles, and a recent article that I found by The Guardian states that 30% of inmates in Canada prisons are Indigenous, even though the Indigenous population only makes up 5% of Canada's population. I know there's no simple answer here, and the system needs major changes, but what do you see as the best support we can offer to our Cree neighbors, or since we have viewers from all over, our Indigenous neighbors, and to our community members?
Well, first off, I think the TRC has really the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the direction that it gives us as Canadians really needs to be implemented in a way that is solid. It's there, is from the ground up. And in the area of justice, Canada has to stop thinking that they have the answer to everything. They have totally ignored the systems of the Indigenous people who for thousands of years controlled, maintained, and established order in their nations and in their communities and in their families, and they had very very loving ways of doing it. There were some really tough measures taken. If the actions of an individual are warranted, but underlying that always is that concept of whakotuin, of love, of support, and in the circle, in the belief of the circle, the worldview of the circle, it's about inclusivity. When your circle is broken by an individual stepping out to do whatever it is that they do, it is the responsibility of the rest of the people in that circle to help that individual back in. No, you don't see that in the Canadian justice system. Canadian justice system is about getting even, punishing, and it has no place in our culture. That's not the way we do things. And so, if we're going to be able to do something and offer a solution to Canada, they have to back off and let us revive our systems and work with the justice system from a different perspective than imposition of exclusivity, which is what the justice system perpetuates in the court systems and in the jailing of individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important to think more about, not locking away our problems and thinking that it's dealt with. It's these are people. These are part of our circle, like you're saying. Like, we can't just lock them away and think that it's dealt with. I think that's true, and we need to think more about how we can push to make those kinds of changes. Thank you for sharing that, Harry.
And the thing with that too is that the Western system has all kinds of sciences that help the person. You know, the psyche of the person, the emotional health of the person, spiritual health of the person. There's all kinds of studies and experts in that field. Those experts exist in our communities. Now, why is it that one has to feel as if they're superior to the other? You know, the most common sense thing to do is to work together. You know, learn to talk to each other and find out where you can help and where your partner can help an individual deal with the skeletons of their being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when there's that superiority complex, that's just racism. We need to call it out when we see it.
Yeah, it's a nice way of saying it. Yeah.
So, in your chapter, Harry, you also talk a lot about how life is a circular cycle, growing from boy to manhood, and even sharing that great-grandparent and great-grandchild is the same word in Cree, Ans Kocha Panak, and how thinking about this cycle, how has that affected your opinion about what healthy masculinity looks like, or how it could look like?
Well, that when you unpack that worldview, it really challenges many of the things that we believe about ourselves as Canadians. This whole individualism that Canada has adopted as a way of being has really taken us to unpleasant places. You know, where people don't feel responsible for their neighbor, don't feel connected to their neighbor, and so in the cycle, it helps to define what a man is. It built into that circular system are ceremonies of transition, responsibilities of passing on knowledge, a defining of what a little boy should be doing to become a man. I have one of my sons has got a 13-year-old right now, and I'm really pleased to see him take take that son, and he's taken him to ceremonies, and he's exposed him to what an uskapio, that's a helper. He's exposed him so to give him an opportunity to see if that's his place in life, as being the helper to the ceremonies and to follow that way of believing. Those are the things that are part of that cycle, and a lot of those elements have been under attack for the last 100 years, and as a consequence, then our men are suffering. Our men are they feel alienated from their families, from the community, and part of my feeling is that we have spent so much time strengthening the women, and we've ignored the men. If you listen to what's happening, across this country, it's women, 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 and where are the men? Who's helping the men? Who's stepping forward to help those men find their place, find where they belong, and learn how to be fathers? I went to a session about 4 years ago in the United States. Fatherhood is sacred. And that was a term that really intrigued me. And it was interesting to listen to people who had been incarcerated, and they were full of tattoos, and they looked like they had, led quite the life, and yet they had found their way out because somebody took the time to help them to find out what a man is, what being a man should be, and how to establish a place for themselves inside of the family and their communities. It's beautiful, beautiful. And that's what we need to do here. We need to help our men find their place. And you're not going to do that in jail. The only thing you find in jail is how to become a worse criminal, to find the negative things of society.
Yeah, I think that's true. Harry, we talked a little bit about your dad already, but I wondered if you had any other role models growing up and if they left an impact for you on your vision of what healthy masculinity is or could be.
Well, it really helps to have an understanding mother. I've had a lot of my support has come from the women in my family. And it's not in any way to take away from the men in my family. I've learned a lot from the men. I've learned about work. My family is a family of workers, how to take care of ourselves, and we're passing that on to our sons and daughters. They're all finding their own way and being independent. But the women helped to shape me anyway. My mother gave me a very strong sense of spirituality, which has carried me throughout my life. I've been connected to my spiritual self, and it's an important part of who I am. My mother, I think, really, she was not a residential school survivor. She was a Métis woman raised by her grandfather, and she taught us about my great grandfather through her ability to tell stories and to remember details. So we had a really strong sense, of the independent spirit of her grandfather. And that was important for me. And I felt connected to that, even though I never knew him. He died way before I was born. but I felt connected to him, and I felt that that sense of independence was important for me to become a healthy man seeking to do good in my family and my community. And I think that came from the women. That came from the women. That sense of caring, that sense of supporting.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Harry. I wish we had more time. There's only more questions that are coming to me instead, but I do want to thank you that you're able to sit down with me today and to talk a little bit about your chapter and a little bit about your life. But before we go, did you have any sending thoughts to send us into our day?
Every accident that occurs in our lives, the unexpected turn and that we experience as we go day to day with our jobs and our roads and our this has been an opportunity for me to really explore my own manhood, and if anything, this has become almost like therapy for myself. That self. That I become really aware of watching men, work with their. And I've seen some beautiful examples. I watched my former son-in-law with his 11-year-old working together, as he's a carpenter, and he had his son with him, took him out of school, and they built a ramp, together. And I was watching them from inside, just that comfortableness they had with each other. And an 11-year-old who didn't want to shirk, he was right in there. That's the kind of stuff it's made me aware of. And I try to capture it when I talk to people, try to get, there is good out there. And we should look for the good, not for the bad. We should acknowledge the bad, but we should look for the good and put it on a pedestal so people can learn. There's enough negativity. We don't need more negativity. We just need, let's find the good fathers of our communities and have them share with us, what life is like for them.
Yeah. That's wonderful, and I hope that our viewers at home are taking heed to that, because I think we should definitely follow that. Thank you, Harry, and I hope that you have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Peaceful at Heart was recorded in the city of Takaranto, the land covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all eat out of the dish, and all of us that share this territory with one spoon. We want to acknowledge the ancestral lands and waterways of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Takaranto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We wish to thank them and any other nations who cared for this land. Colonization is a continuing form of oppression, so it is important that we acknowledge the lands and digital spaces that we are holding and taking up. We remember the acknowledged and unacknowledged, recorded and unrecorded, past, present, and future. We are all treaty people.